Welcome to the Crochet Challenge for Warm Up America 2017. Before we get into anything, I just want to sincerely thank you for your participation in this challenge. Our efforts are really going to touch a family in need, and your blanket, once completed, will be donated to the Warm Up America Foundation, and that's how we're going to become yarn heroes. We're going to use our talent for the greater good. To find the written instructions, the diagrams, all of the information you need on this challenge as far as submission goes, your time frame, the Facebook group that's associated with this, please visit behooked.com/WUA Challenge 2017. That's WUA Challenge 2017. That's going to be your resource page for this entire challenge. So I recommend that you bookmark it and you visit it often as you finish this challenge over the next couple of weeks. This is an absolutely amazing pattern, if I do say so myself. It's one of those techniques that you really must try if you haven't already. It has several names. You may have heard it as the Catherine Wheel Stitch, the Wool Eater Afghan, or Bavarian Crochet. No matter what you call it, I simply call it amazing. Like I said, it's one of those patterns that you really must try. So without further ado, let's dive into the second crochet challenge for Warm Up America. We'll do so right after this. To begin our blankets, we're just going to create a slip knot. Place that loop on your hook, and then we want to chain 4. Now what we want to do is form a ring because this pattern is worked inside out. So just place your hook into that first chain that you made and then create a slip stitch. So yarn over, pull through, and pull through. Now you'll need to stretch it so that you can see the center of the ring. And I tend to just stick my finger through that hole so that I know where to work my next stitches. As complicated as this pattern looks, there's only 2 rounds that are repeated over and over. So let's look at that first one now. We'll begin by chaining 3. Now we're going to create a 4 treble cluster in the center of this ring. So you'll wrap your yarn twice. Since we're working with a treble crochet, insert your hook into the ring, yarn over, and pull up a loop. Then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, and pull through 2 again. Now we're just going to hold it there. We're going to continue on with the cluster. And so right now we have 2 loops on our hook. Now we're going to wrap 2 more times, insert our hook into the same ring, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, and pull through 2, and hold it there. Now as you can see, we have 3 loops on our hook. We're going to do that again. Now we have 4 loops on our hook. We want to do that 1 more time, so we have a total of 4 treble crochets in our cluster. Now once we have a total of 5 loops on our hook, and we have a total of 4 treble crochets, we're ready to finish off this cluster. We're going to do that by yarning over and pulling through all the loops on our hook. And now what we want to do is mimic that chain 3 on the other side. That's going to finish off our cluster, and so what we need to do at this point is make 3 more chains and then slip stitch in the center of the ring. Now that's going to finish our first cluster. Now to finish off round 1, all we need to do is make 3 more clusters in the center of the ring. We're going to do it the same way. Start with your chain 3 and then work your treble crochet cluster that has 4 treble crochets. Then once we have all of our clusters, yarn over and pull through all of the loops, and then chain 3 and slip stitch in the center of the ring to finish off our second cluster. Now sometimes you may have to shift the stitches over like that just to make everything fit. Now you'll simply repeat that 2 more times to finish off round 1. At the end of round number 1, our blanket should look something like this, where we have 4 clusters. Now what we need to do is start from this point here. We're not going to chain or anything. We're going to make 10 treble crochets on the top of each one of these clusters. So you'll need to find that chain 1, the first chain that you created, which is right there, and that's where we're going to create our 10 treble crochet stitches for each one of these clusters. So the first thing that we need to do is locate that first chain, the chain that's at the top of each of the clusters. Now you don't want to work here, because if you work in this big gap, then it's going to create a large hole. So we need to find that chain 1. And if you need help with this, you can always use a stitch marker. That way you can get used to where it is and where to work. So once you've located that, we're going to make our 10 treble crochets in that space. So once you've made all of your treble crochet stitches in your cluster, then what we need to do is finish things off by joining with a slip stitch in the center of the ring. So we just want to open things up, find the center, insert your hook, and make a slip stitch. Now that finishes off this cluster right here. And what we need to do is repeat this for the other 3. So once you've made it to the end of round 1, I've finished my last cluster here, and we're just going to make a slip stitch in the center of the ring. And that finishes off round 2. Now we're ready to begin on round 3. So the first thing we need to do is locate our first 3 stitches in our first cluster here. So find your chain and disregard that. We're not going to do anything with it, but it's going to help us to find our first 3 treble crochets, which you can see right here in this little group. Now the reason why we need to find that is because to begin round 3, we want to start in a different place than where we are right now. So find your first stitch, turn your work up, insert your hook in that back loop only, and make a slip stitch. Now do that for the next stitch as well. And the next stitch. And one more time in the next stitch. So what we've done here is we've shifted our work from where we were to where we need to begin on round 3. So the next thing we're going to focus on are these next 4 treble crochets. So we're going to do a 4 treble crochet cluster, much like we did in round 1. So we need to chain 3, and then we want to find that next post here. Now we want to make sure we're not working into that post where our chain is coming from. We want the next post. We're going to work a back post treble crochet. So insert your hook in from the back towards the front and back out the back side, just like that. And then finish off your treble crochet like normal. But we're just going to hold it here, just like we did with those first clusters. We're just going to hold it, not finish it off on the last step because we want to make another one in the next stitch. So back post treble crochet, just like that. You can see the post is going to be sticking out the back side of your hook. And hold it here. So we have 2, and we want to have a total of 4. So work that back post treble one more time. And again. Now once we have 4 partial treble crochets on our hook, we have a total of 5 loops. You'll yarn over and pull through all 5 loops. And again, to finish things off, we'll chain 3. Now that chain right here, that's where we're going to be putting all of those treble crochet stitches into. So if you need to, it might be helpful to grab a stitch marker just so you know where to work if you're having problems finding them. Now you'll locate your very last treble crochet where you did your back post. And then the next stitch in front of that, we're going to make a slip stitch in between those 2 stitches. So don't work into a chain or anything, just right in between those 2 stitches, make a slip stitch. Now that's how you're going to handle each one of the corners of your blanket. Now we're going to move on to these areas right here where they're in between clusters. So we're going to have a 7 treble crochet clusters. We're going to have a lot of loops on our hook. We're going to work in these 3 and then our slip stitch and then the next 3 on the cluster. So that's a total of 7 stitches that we're going to have on our hook right now. So we're going to begin by chaining 3. That's how we're going to start every single one of our 7 treble crochet clusters. with a chain 3. We'll find these first 3 treble crochets from that last cluster that we're working on. And then we're going to back post treble crochet around each one of those, but just know we're doing a cluster here, so don't finish off your treble crochets. So we'll be working these just like we did before. And you'll stop when you have 2 loops on your hook and move on to the next. And then around that last treble crochet in that cluster, and so that finishes off that one here. Then we need to find our slip stitch, which is right here. And we're going to work a back post treble as a part of our cluster here. So just the same motion, going in from the back and out, and then work your partial treble crochet for our cluster here. Now we have a total of 5 loops on our hook, and we're going to move on to the next cluster. We want to find that first treble crochet, which is right here, and we want to avoid our chain. That's not where we want to work, so find the chain to locate your first 3. Then you'll just continue with your 7 treble crochet cluster. And one final stitch here. So at this point you should have a total of 7 stitches on your hook and a total of 8 loops. Once you've done that, you've made sure that you have your last 3 in those first 3, then you'll just yarn over and pull through all 8 loops on your hook, and then you'll finish it off by chaining 3, and then you'll locate that space in between the last stitch and the first stitch, and you'll just slip stitch into that space. And that's the most difficult part in this entire design. It's going to be a little bit difficult to get used to at first, but once you get the hang of it, it really is very easy. So anytime we're in a point right here, we're going to make one of those 4 treble crochet clusters like we did here. And anytime we're in between clusters, like right there, we're going to be doing one of these big clusters of 7 stitches. The other thing that's important to remember is anytime we start one of these clusters, we're going to chain 3. And whenever we finish it, we're going to chain 3. So now we're moving on to this corner cluster. So that means we're going to do a 4 treble crochet cluster. We'll start with chaining 3. We'll find our stitches. And then again, working in the back post and not finishing up the treble crochet stitch, but simply stopping once you have 2 loops on your hook. Then once we have a total of 4 stitches on our hook, then we'll yarn over, pull through all 5 of those loops, chain 3 to finish it off, and then slip stitch in between the last and the first stitch. Now we're ready to repeat and make one of these big clusters here. So we're going to do that next. Start by chaining 3, and then locate the 3 stitches here in that cluster. Then we'll locate our slip stitch and include that into our cluster, working from the back. And then we'll move on to those next 3 stitches in that cluster. Now once we have all of our stitches on our hook, a total of 7 with 8 loops, then we're going to finish off the cluster by yarning over and pulling through all 8 of those loops and chain 3 and slip stitch in between the last and the first stitch. Now everything from here on out is a repeat. We just want to repeat that all the way around until we get back to the beginning. So once you reach your last little section here, it's going to look slightly different than our other large clusters. And that's because it looks a little bit different here because of our slip stitch from the beginning of the round. So what I've done is I've made my first 3 stitches in this cluster, and I'm going to work it as normal, but I want to show you where to work it just in case you're confused by those slip stitches. You'll still work through that slip stitch, and then you'll locate those last 3 stitches and work the back post treble crochets for the remainder of your cluster. Now you'll see that this really isn't changing things for you. It just looks a little bit different because we have that slip stitch up there on the top. So you'll finish off your cluster, chain 3. So then you'll simply slip stitch in between that first and last stitch. And that finishes off round number 3. So when we begin round 4, we're really only introducing one new concept, and that's because we have these big clusters right here. So we have a side to work with now, not just the 4 corners. But before we get to that, we're going to stick with what's familiar in these corners. So just like we did back in round 2, we're going to locate that chain that's up here at the point, the very top of each one of these clusters. We're going to make a total of 10 treble crochets in that same point, that same stitch at the top of each one of these clusters. Now just keep that in mind. It's always going to be the case whenever we get to the corner of our blankets. We're always going to make these 10 treble crochets in that chain stitch or the very top of each one of the clusters. So memorizing little things like that with this pattern are what's going to make this so easy for you. Once you learn these 2 pattern row repeats, it's going to be easier for you to work with it, so you don't have to rely on the video tutorial and you don't have to rely on the written instructions either. There's only a few things that you absolutely need to remember. This is one of them. We're going to make 10 treble crochets at each one of our corners when we're working on our even rounds. The other thing to remember is when we're working on our odd number rounds, we're going to always make our 4 treble crochet clusters in the corners. Now once we get finished with this corner, we'll talk about what you need to remember on the sides of your blanket, because as we continue to make more rounds, of course our blanket's going to grow in size, so our sides are going to become longer the further we get into this pattern. Now once we've made our 10 treble crochets, we're just going to slip stitch right here, just over top of that stitch from the previous round. So just insert your hook into the space in between those stitches and make your slip stitch. Now that's going to finish off that big group there. So our first corner is finished. Now when we're working on the sides here, when we have this big cluster, we're going to make a total of 6 treble crochets into that chain. So it looks a little bit different than it does on the corners. It's actually easier to find. So again, you don't want to work in that chain space or this big space here, because it's going to just create this big gap in your pattern. And that's not what we want. So we want to locate that chain stitch right there. That's where we're going to work our 6. So we're going to make our 6 treble crochet stitches just right there in that cluster. We're not going to chain or anything at the beginning or the end of this round when we're working with these groups of stitches. Now I mentioned there were a couple of things that are going to help you to memorize this pattern. We talked about the corners already, the 2 things that you have to remember with the corners. So when you're working on even rounds on the sides, you're always going to have a total of 6 treble crochets in each one of these clusters. When you're working on your odd number rows or rounds, you're always going to be doing those large clusters, or we have a 7 treble crochet cluster, where we have all the loops on our hook. So once you remember those 2 things for the sides and the 2 things for the corners, you're really good to go. The only other thing that you'll have to consider is when we slip stitch at the beginning of the round. Now that is going to happen when we are on an odd number round. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now we're looking for our next corner here, and I'm just going to work it in the same way. Then our next side, I'll add my 6 treble crochets here, and then just to repeat that all the way around. Once you've done that, come back to the video and we'll talk about what to do next. So once you've made it to the end of your round, I've finished up my cluster here, and then you're going to locate that slip stitch, and that's where you want to make your slip stitch to finish off the round. So in that same space, just over top of your other stitch. So the next thing we see is this big cluster here. That's how we know that we have finished this round. So the next thing that we're going to do is begin round 5, an odd number, so that means we're going to slip stitch in these first 4 stitches, working in that back loop only. So the important takeaway here is to recognize that we're skipping these first 3. So we're slip stitching on top of those. And those are going to be the last 3 in our cluster on one of our next rounds. So just keep that in mind. We always want to put our chain 3 on top of this 4th treble crochet right there. We'll work our back post cluster. So this is a corner. So we're going to be working a 4 treble crochet cluster. Now up until this point, we have covered every part of the pattern repeat. And so just keep in mind those important notes that I have given you throughout this tutorial. And what I need for you to do at this point is finish crocheting your blanket so that it measures approximately 40 inches wide by 40 inches long. So at this point, my blanket measures approximately 40 inches wide by 40 inches long. And just one little tip, when you're measuring your blankets, you want to make sure you really stretch it out. Either lay it out on a bed or a flat surface, because this pattern is very stretchy. And so you want to make sure that you stretch it out so that you're getting an accurate measurement. So right now we're in the final stretch of our blankets, and we really just have 2 more rounds to go. The first thing that we want to do is create a border that's going to give us a straight edge. And we're going to do that with round 1 of our border. We're going to fill in these little gaps here by using various different stitches. So we'll use the shorter stitches on the top, the longer stitches in the bottom, and that's going to result in a straight edge. So the first step in the border, round 1, we're going to chain 3. So this chain 3 is going to act as a treble crochet. It's always going to take place in the middle of these groups. It's this tallest stitch, so this is where we need to compensate for the height to make it straight. Now we're going to work in the back loops only. The next stitch, you want to make a double crochet. Now for the next stitch, you'll make a half double crochet. Now the next thing that we want to do is make 1 single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. Now what we want to do is create a corner stitch. So in that next stitch here, we're going to make 2 single crochets. Now this is just going to give us a softer, kind of a more rounded corner rather than a point. So from here, we're just going to make 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. And then half double crochet into the next stitch. And then double crochet into the next. And then we're going to make a treble crochet into this slip stitch. Now you can find the back loop of that stitch and work it into there. Now the next stitch is a double crochet. And we're working these in the back loop only. Next is a half double crochet. Then we want to make 2 single crochets in each of, well, 1 single crochet in each of the next 2 stitches rather. And that's going to be the repeat for this round. So whenever we have an in-between section here, we'll half double crochet where we're at now, double crochet in the stitch that's right next to that corner, and then we'll treble crochet into the slip stitch, and then we'll work that in reverse order. So what I need for you to do at this point is just repeat that pattern of stitches in order to create your flat edge. So work that until you get to the other corner. So our starting point is here. What I need for you to do is just work all the way until you get to the other. So once you've made it around to that first corner, so you finished up your first side, I just want to quickly review the different stitches that we're going to work as we go around this corner. So the next stitch is a double crochet and then a half double crochet, one single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches, and then for our corner stitch we'll make 2 single crochets in the next, now make 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches, half double crochet in the next, double crochet in the next stitch, and then treble crochet in that slip stitch. Now that's the repeat for round 1 of our border. So all you need to do is just finish up your border working these stitches in the same way that we've just discussed. Come back to the video, then we'll talk about the final round in this pattern. When you've made it to the end of round 1 of the border, you just want to locate your chain 3 and make a slip stitch into that third chain to finish off the round. Now what we're going to do is fasten off our ice cream yarn and grab our modern baby yarn. Now we're going to locate that slip stitch where we fastened off our other yarn, insert your hook into that stitch, and that's where we're going to fasten on our modern baby yarn. Now this part of the pattern is super easy compared to the rest of it. We just want to pull that chain or that loop through our hook and make a chain 1. Now that chain is not going to count as a stitch, so make a single crochet into that same place. That's going to count as our first stitch. Now what we want to do from here on out is just make 1 single crochet into every stitch except for the corners. So find your first stitch here. We're working in both loops this time, not just the back, and make a single crochet. Now single crochet all the way until you get to this first corner. And once you reach that second single crochet of our corner, that's where we're going to increase. So this second stitch, we're going to make 2 single crochets, and then we'll proceed like normal. 1 single crochet into each of the next stitches for the side of the blanket, and then once you get back to the corner, you'll increase in that second corner stitch. So at this point, go ahead and finish crocheting round 2 of the border. Come back to the video, we'll talk about how to fasten off this round, and our blankets will be complete. Okay, so once you've made it all the way around, we're going to end on our very last stitch. So right before where we started, we're going to find that first stitch, and we'll just make a slip stitch there. That's going to fasten off this round, and it's going to be the completion of our blanket. So just trim your yarn, pull that loop or that tail through your hook, and then all that's left to do is weave in your ends. Now all that's left to do is to send your baby blanket to the Warm Up America Foundation. You can find the specific instructions on how to do so, the address to use, all at BeHookedCrochet.com. That link again is BeHookedCrochet.com/WUA Challenge 2017. So your Afghans must be postmarked and in the mail by January 21st of 2017 to complete the challenge. Then Warm Up America will receive them shortly after, and they're going to keep me updated on the progress. So shortly after the challenge concludes, I'm going to give you all updates on how we did, how many lives we were able to touch, how many finished baby blankets we were able to send to Warm Up America. So look for that post somewhere between the end of January, early February. You'll find it at BeHookedCrochet.com, as well as the Crochet Challenge event Facebook page. Now, on behalf of my sponsors, Lion Brand Yarn and Clover USA, as well as BeHooked Crochet, I sincerely thank you for your participation. This was a serious challenge to complete this blanket, and 2 weeks, and you all did absolutely amazing. Thank you again, and stay tuned for the next challenge at BeHookedCrochet.com.